All right, hello everyone. I'm going to talk about communication in this video. We're going to talk about what is communication competency, how do we define communication, and then really apply it to our context of this term, which is organizational comm. So I have the vocabulary list printed. I also have it up on the computer. And this vocabulary list is what I'll be using to talk today. You can download or open it on your own device in our Canvas page in week 1 module. So this has a lot of terms. I can't hit every single one of them, but I do want to get some of the most important ideas. One thing when we study in communication, without the S, meaning that we're looking at interpersonal, public speaking, and small group, that we are interested in comm theory, we say that communication is transactional. Now, the degree of transaction depends on how, whether we're with the person or we can see the other person we're communicating with or hear them, puts us on a spectrum of transaction. So when we think about communication as being transactional, there's different elements to that. One is that there's a give and take. There's a simultaneous sending and receiving of messages. So even if I was in a conversation with you, let's say we were sitting in an office or we went out for a cup of coffee and we are face-to-face communication, that would be probably at the highest end of transactional when you're actually in person with someone. Because even if someone is not speaking, we say in communication that they're still communicating. And we call a lot of the channels nonverbal. In fact, the majority of communication channels are nonverbal channels. It's actually only my words and my syntax that is my verbal channel. Everything else is nonverbal. And there's a lot of them, a lot of different channels that make that up. Everything from head, shoulders, knees and toes, eyes and ears and mouth and nose, right? We have our gestures, we have our eyes, even our feet. Actually, gestures are considered one, and hands and thumbs themselves are considered a separate channel than gestures. And with the face, there's several channels from eyes to facial expressions, posture, feet are a separate channel. And each of these channels carries messages, and we are encoding those messages. And then the receiver is decoding those messages and attaching meaning to them. Now, here comes the fun part, that what we've encoded doesn't always get decoded the way we wanted it to. Miscommunication. So a lot of what we're studying in communication theory is looking at what is communication competency, meaning how can we make sure that what we intend and our meaning gets interpreted. And that means that we're being effective. So effective communication is that you can move towards the goal of communicating your idea. And we don't just say effective communication. For communication competency, we like to put the word appropriate with it. So effective and appropriate. So as soon as we add that word appropriate, this is in consideration of the other and your audience and difference in perspectives. And difference in cultures. Differences matter, and especially in the field of business and creativity and teamwork, we're going to start really focusing on our differences is what makes us stronger. We want to throw out the similarity thesis. Often we think, well, if we have consensus or everyone agrees and we all look at the world the same way, that somehow we're stronger. And it turns out if everyone sees everything the same way, we lose innovation, we lose the chance to move in new directions and see things in new ways. And that means we need to learn how to communicate when we don't all agree and infuse energy into that. So effective communication, effective and appropriate, which is why right out of the gate, I've included the National Communication Association's code for ethical communication so that we can start thinking when we use the word appropriate or we talk about communication competency, it should include ethics. So ethics is when we say something is right or wrong, right? There's a right way and a wrong way. Ethical, I'm sure some of you might be studying ethics and leadership, so you might already have a grasp of this idea. When we apply it to communication, the word good is often used, and good as a capital G, good, meaning that it means that your communication is respectful and honest, and you are bringing credibility and integrity to your messaging. So that good and ethical is different than being effective. If we took that appropriateness and ethics away, someone could be effective, but not be appropriate. In fact, someone could be effective and unethical, meaning that they can sell their product or they can gain wealth or they can get followership, but through unethical means, meaning that they were effective with that, but they didn't do the path of what is right and what is good. In communication, there are myths to communication. There's quite a few, but just right out of the gate, one of my favorite myths to put emphasis on is that not all communication is good communication, meaning that communication, just because it's communication, like, oh, you know what this relationship needs is more communication. Nothing gets me more riled up. In fact, I was watching Naked Afraid just a couple weeks ago, and I think Jeff was saying in Last One Standing, like, oh, if we just had some communication. And I was like, no, it's not communication. Communication can mess things up. Communication can be weaponized. Communication can be destructive. And that's why we want to always marry the word communication with functional communication, ethical communication, appropriate communication. And now we're moving towards understanding this field and what we are, what's the foundation of studying communication. In organizational communication, which I talked about already in the syllabus video, but basically, we're looking at the social networks that happen within a group and the subculture groups, the formal norms and rules that are laid out by the organization, whatever form it takes. And then how do individuals in that organization communicate messages formally by the paths set up by the organization? So I belong to a professional development group at Oregon State University for continuing education. And one of the things we have is a chat that we're supposed to sign into on certain days of the week. And we exchange ideas and we can talk on this chat that's just for the professional development team. And that is set up by our supervisor and through Oregon State University. So I would say that is a very formal way of talking with my team and my group while we all work remotely. However, an informal channel would be when my friend who is also in that group, and I go for a hike, and we start talking about some of our ideas, and she might tell me something about, oh, so and so this, or I heard this, and there's an informal way that communication is also popping up in those organizations. There's also this idea of the grapevine, which is a sub part of another aspect of informal communication. And a grapevine is when there's different information that's moving from different hierarchicals or authority groups and moving through non-established rules or norms channels set up by the organization. Like an unofficial, a grapevine is a great word for it. It's almost like a gossip channel. You might want to think of it. I don't like the word gossip because it has a bad connotation to it. That's why I like the word grapevine. Usually you can find when we do social network analysis of an organization, the grapevine or the informal moves through a hub, and the hub is someone who doesn't have as much power. So who in the group doesn't have a lot of power, but has access to a lot of different people? Usually this is an administrative assistant or another service person in the organization. Maybe it's someone in scheduling or human resources. And these people act like hubs, and a lot of grapevine information passes through them in that informal way. Okay, so that's a really important part of this class, and these words in this vocabulary list as we're talking through them are words that I want you to start infusing into your writing and your speaking when you're talking, and I'd like to see them become a part of your vocabulary as you converse. On the second page of the vocabulary handout is a small little diagram. This is a very simplified diagram for communication in businesses. When I do my lecture, when the next week opens, I have a lecture just on the history of management styles. So we're going to move from classical management to human relations, to human resources, to system theory and ecosystem theory. This is kind of like this diagram is just to give you a little peek into what we're talking about when we get into those organizational management styles. There's the Business Com 1.0, which is the top down. There's the company and the leadership, or the authority supervisors, the administration, and then there's the workers, and communication goes one way. That's very classical management, very bureaucratic in its style. In the second diagram, Business Communication 2.0, let's have a conversation. This is where the communication is moving in multiple directions. We have bottom up, we have coworkers and different communication happening diagonally and horizontally and all that. So what we do understand is that most organizations or most groups that you're working for have a combination. There's some overlap of these different styles that you are experiencing today, which is why we have a tendency to be moving now most currently towards system theory and really understanding the workplace as an ecosystem. That's the new metaphor. We'll talk more about that next week. So we talked about ethical communication and what's right and wrong. When we talk about what is right and wrong with communication, we'll use implicit rules and explicit rules. Explicit rules are the rules we say out loud. Like, when you have your onboarding for a new job, or if you've ever helped someone come into a new job, you probably said, and if you have a problem, you talk to this person first and this, and then when you need to talk to someone about taking time off, you talk to this person. That is explicit rules about how to communicate in the company, explicit rules. Implicit, IMPLICT, if you couldn't hear, IM. Implicit rules are rules you don't say out loud, but they're there all the time. And usually implicit rules are culture-based rules. They're the rules of the culture. And when you're new on a job, you're going to hear a lot of explicit rules, but after a while, you hear less and less rules unless you break one of them. And the more embedded into the culture you are, the more the rules become invisible into that implicit rules. They're the most obvious things that you know they're only broken. You know that it's hard to see them, basically, is what I'm trying to say. It's hard to see implicit rules when you are a part of the culture. It's only when you're new. Here's a good example. Let's say you get, maybe you've been invited to dinner at someone's house. It doesn't even have to be that much of an intercultural difference. Each family has implicit rules about eating dinner at the table. And when you're first there, you're like, okay, what are people doing? Are they just reaching for the rolls, or did someone say, please pass me the rolls? Did people put their napkins in their lap, or is it more informal? Like, you're on really high alert of what everyone is doing, and that is because it's often, that's how we learn about what is right and wrong when we're in a new situation. Maybe you'll have some stories for me of being on the job and the implicit rules that people didn't tell you, and then you broke it, and then you felt like you were in trouble, but no one had told you, right? That's something that sometimes happens. So whenever we talk about communication, we are meta-communicating. So meta-communication is communication about communication. And we want to start using that word as well. So meta-communication is everything from call me later, hey, it's good to see you, call me later, right? That would be a meta-communication statement that's embedded into an interaction. It could be, let's say something went wrong with a project and we felt like we need to talk about that project. Let's have a meeting. Let's talk about the project. Meta-communication statement. Oh, when should we have that meeting? How long should it be? Meta-communication. So any communication about communication is a meta-communication statement, and I'd like to see that word starting to pop up in your work as well. Okay, so let's talk about culture in the workplace. When we talk about communication competency, remember we're going to talk about effective and appropriate, but we want to also add part of being appropriate is your intercultural communication competency. So intercultural communication and competency is being aware of different norms from different culture groups. For example, eye contact is a great one. We all need to make eye contact in the West, but in Western business culture, eye contact is I'm making eye contact with the person who has authority as a way to demonstrate that I'm listening. But actually, eye contact, we know a lot of things about eye contact. First of all, not all cultures see that as respectful. Some cultures see that as disrespectful to make eye contact to the person in authority when they're talking to you. Having a downcast eyes is actually the way to show respect and demonstrate listening. We even can find this in the United States in some co-culture groups. Co-culture is a term we use in intercultural communication or anthropology to talk about subcultures. So you have your greater culture, and then you have co-cultures. And the reason why we don't say sub and we say co instead of sub is so that we can give them equity and value and not create hierarchies of different cultural groups. So a co-culture groups in the United States, because especially in the, well, not especially, this is happening all over the world, that there is a lot of migrations and immigrant groups that come in and infuse the greater culture with their communication norms and all the other things that come with a multicultural society. So some of these groups that see eye contact downcast, those kids go to school, and if they have a teacher who says eye contact is how you show me respect, and they're not making eye contact, often those kids are at a disadvantage and they often get shuffled into detention, and they're always in trouble when they are not really. Their implicit rules of their family is don't make eye contact when someone in authority is talking, and then they have to adapt to a school system that says make eye contact with the person in authority, and it can be really, really hard on children who come from different cultural groups. Same thing in the world of communication, in the world of business and organizations. And understanding some of these differences can be really powerful way to create bridges and include others. So I'm just going to talk about low context and high context culture. Some of you have taken my other classes and have heard me talk about this again, talked about this before. So here I go again. So it's really relevant in the field of business to understand low context culture, because low context culture is the dominant speaking culture of the world of business. And low context culture is the culture of brevity. It's the culture of getting to the point, of having an opinion. And what you say right out of the gate should have impact. It should be the point, and you shouldn't have much more to say after that unless asked. Meaning low context means I'm not going to give you all the context. I'm just going to come straight to the point of what I need to say. And there's a speed to low context culture because the messages being sent have no wiggle room for meaning. What I say is exactly what I mean. There's no hidden messages. There's nothing to interpret. There's nothing else. It's just what I say is what I say. Low context culture, even though it's always a preference for an answer is yes or no, right? Like, boom, done. Yes or no. In fact, thumbs up, thumbs down, social media culture is very low context that way. Some of you who might be used to creating more context, or things aren't as black and white or yes or no, you're like, where's the maybe button on social media, which has more context. I think Facebook or now Meta, when they started creating all the little hugs and hearts and smiley faces and sad faces, they were trying to create a more high context reaction to a very low context social media culture, just as an example to think about. So high context culture relies less on verbal explicit messaging. And when you're in the culture of high context, everything has meaning, and it has a whole lot of meaning that's embedded into everything that we do. Now, sometimes high context culture can be not too much talking. Sometimes it could just be a nonverbal action or ritual that is performed, but it has a lot of meaning in it. A low context culture can also sometimes mean that someone's going to talk a lot and isn't going to be brief and in their messaging. That usually happens when we see a low context person who has a lot more verbiage. They usually have more power and authority. People have to stop and listen, and they get really addicted. There is an addiction to talking and having everybody stop and listen to you, right? I'll talk more about that as we move through the course. But they're also, for low context, it's also when I want my instructions to be followed explicitly. I don't want any wiggle room, and I don't want you to interpret the meaning in any other way than the way I mean it. So, for example, lawyers who every word has embedded meanings into it, they're going to be much more explicit in their verbiage when creating contracts. So there's no wiggle room, there's no loopholes. What I'm having you sign is exactly what I want you to sign, and I don't mean anything else. So that can be low context culture too. And it's really good to understand that what's happening in the cultures that make them act the way they do. Okay, let's see. The next thing I want to talk about is nonverbal communication. Before I talk about nonverbal, I want to say that here I have what is effective intercultural communication. It says avoid ethnocentrism, avoid stereotyping. So let me just talk a bit about that. For example, when we say avoid ethnocentrism, we do this without always knowing that we're doing it, but it's that to not put cultures on a hierarchy, that when things are different, they're just different. Now, you might have a preference for something, a culture, a tradition, or a ritual or language over another culture's way of communicating. And that's okay. But if the preference is because mine is better than yours, or yours is worse than mine, now you're moving into ethnocentrism. So when we think about the way we talk about intercultural experiences, whether you are representative of the majority culture or a representative of a minority culture, we want to always avoid creating hierarchies. Stereotyping is when stereotypes are usually created by the people who are not in the group. Okay. Stereotypes are usually created by people who don't have membership in the group. They're out group. They're looking inside at that group of people over there, and they start seeing patterns, and they see things that they don't really understand, and they put labels on those patterns and make a decision about them. And then a stereotype, I'm talking to one person, I recognize they're part of that group, and then I remember what those stereotypes are, and I decide something about that one person based on the group stereotype. And that is a dehumanizing process. And whether the stereotypes are positive or negative, each person is their own unique person and should be interacted with and have depth and learn about them as separate from the group you've attached them to. So be open and interact with people in a way that allows others to be themselves. So to unstereotype or avoid stereotype is decategorize. You want to take them out of their category and then interact with them and allow that person to define themselves. So hopefully that's a clear way. When we talk about nonverbal communication. There's so much with nonverbal communication. I feel like we need an OL class just on nonverbal. I'll talk to David about it. But with nonverbal communication, these are all the different channels and that we've talked about before, and all the different messages that can be sent through them. Now, we have a tendency to, oh gosh, and this is such a big topic. I'm almost a little lost. Let me just pause for a second and think about what I want to say next. Okay, so with nonverbal communication, we say that nonverbal is ambiguous and abstract, meaning that we can't know what a nonverbal is unless we have an agreed meaning with it. So for example, peace, peace. Like this is an emblem, a nonverbal emblem. I'll just do this as an example. And if I say this is what for peace, or here, that's a heart, I love you. Those are emblems that have direct translation. Or if I raised my hand and was like, hello, am I waving to say hello? Or am I waving to say goodbye? Or call on me? Context drives meaning with nonverbals, and how well we know someone also drives meaning. The less we know someone, the less accuracy we have with being able to decide what someone nonverbals mean. So just because I'm crossing my arms does not mean you know that I'm upset or cold, or if I do a sidelong glance, right? Like there's different things that we have to be really careful with how we interpret nonverbals unless we know someone. And the better you know someone, like your family, the people you grew up with, you probably can interpret their nonverbals a lot more accurately. So I have a lot more to say about that, but I think that is the best way to start off with nonverbal communication. Okay. I would say at this point for communication, and when we talk about communication competency, you already have a really high level of communication competency. You have gotten into this master's program, you have jobs and families, and you have a lot of things that you are juggling in your life. And to get to this point of education means that you had to communicate with a lot of people to get to this moment where you're listening to my lecture. That means that you're already at a high level. So in this class, when we want to increase your communication competency, we're really thinking about intercultural competency. What is ethics in communication? How can we improve our adaptability and appropriateness, and bring language to what we're doing so that we don't make the mistake ever of saying we just need more communication. Let's not say that anymore. Let's say we need functional communication, or we need good communication, good with a capital G. All right, everybody. I hope this helped you out, and I'm looking forward to reading your reports this week. Bye, everyone.